I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. After 14 years running the backbone of Harbor Point's coastal operations, Graham looked me in the eye and told me my VP promotion was being postponed indefinitely. Budget constraints, he said. Be patient, he said. I walked out of his office without a single word of protest, because I already knew something he didn't. When loyalty is taken for granted long enough, it becomes a weapon in the right hands. If you've ever had your hard work dismissed, tell me in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, I'd love for you to subscribe. For 14 years, I arrived before sunrise at the Harbor Point Freight Systems Operations Center, long before the port crane started moving and before the early shift workers clocked in. People used to joke that the Charleston Harbor ran on my schedule, not the other way around. I never corrected them, because deep down, I knew it was true. Every container that came through our Gulf Coast division, every carrier negotiation, every emergency reroute during storm season, I handled it. I built the protocols, trained the coordinators, and cleaned up the messes quietly before anyone above me ever realized a crisis had been brewing. I wasn't flashy, but my results spoke for me. 98% on-time throughput, 13 consecutive years of clean audits, and a client retention rate the executive team bragged about at industry conferences. In the comment sections of stories like mine, people always say, "Why didn't you leave earlier? Why stay when they use you?" The answer is simple. I believed loyalty meant something. My parents raised me with the idea that if you give a company your best, they'll give you a future. So I gave Harbor Point everything I had: nights, weekends, holidays spent with a laptop at my kitchen table while my neighbors put up Christmas lights outside. I missed birthdays, first days of school for my nieces, even a family reunion that would have been my last chance to see my aunt before she passed. I told myself it was temporary, that once the VP of Coastal Operations role officially opened, once my promotion came through, I'd finally earn the balance my work deserved. For 2 years, Graham Lister, our regional director, assured me it was coming. Every performance review ended the same way. "You're the obvious successor. We're just finalizing details. Sit tight." I believed him. I kept taking on more. When he needed someone to bring order to the chaotic freight optimization team, I stepped in and rebuilt their workflow in 6 weeks. When 2 senior coordinators quit on the same day, I absorbed both of their portfolios for 3 months. When a chemical spill shut down half our port access road last summer, I coordinated reroutes across 3 terminals and prevented a multi-million-dollar demurrage hit. And Graham? He forwarded my report to the board with a single line: "Handled by my team," but I didn't resent that. Not yet. I thought that was how things worked. You put in your time, you climb the ladder, you earn the reward. And the truth is, I loved the job. I loved the puzzle of it, the constant problem solving, the pride of seeing a delayed vessel restored to schedule because of a plan I designed. I loved my team even more. Evan, with his calm under pressure. Sienna, who knew every client's quirks better than their own managers. And Noah, meticulous to a fault, but the only person I trusted with hazardous material routing. They weren't just colleagues, they were people I'd mentored, people who came to me for career advice, people who made the longest days feel manageable. To me, Harbor Point wasn't just a workplace, it was a place I had built. Piece by piece, system by system, relationship by relationship. That's why, when Graham scheduled that Friday meeting and labeled it VP Finalization and Transition Planning, I walked in with my notes, my confidence, and my gratitude. I thought the next chapter of my career was finally unfolding. I had no idea it was the beginning of the end. When I stepped into Graham's office that Friday at exactly 3 p.m., I expected a formal conversation, something worthy of a role I had spent years proving myself for. Instead, he waved at the chair across from him with the same casual flick you'd use to greet a neighbor you barely knew. There was no printed agenda, no congratulatory energy, no acknowledgement of what this meeting was supposed to represent. My stomach tightened, though I kept my face neutral. "Thanks for coming in," he said, leaning back like he had all the time in the world. "I wanted to talk to you about the VP situation. Not promotion, not transition. Situation." It was the first hairline crack in the floor beneath me. I forced optimism into my voice. Of course, I'm ready to finalize whatever details we need to get in place. He exhaled in that long, performative way managers do when they pretend they're carrying the weight of the company. Right. So here's where things landed. The board reviewed the proposal, and unfortunately, they've decided to postpone the creation of the VP position indefinitely. I felt the words hit me almost physically. Not because I was surprised. I dealt with enough corporate hedging to recognize soft language when I heard it, but because of how effortlessly he said it, like this wasn't 2 years of promises dissolving in real time. Postpone, I repeated, keeping my voice steady. Indefinitely, he confirmed, nodding sympathetically, the way someone nods when telling you your flight is delayed, not your future. Budget constraints, economic tightening, you know how these things go. I had dedicated 14 years to this company. I did know how these things went, but I also knew when someone was lying to my face. Graham, you told me this promotion was already approved. You said we were waiting on final signatures. He lifted his hands in a half shrug, and at the time that was true. But the board is being extremely conservative now. They want to hold off on creating new executive overhead. That phrase, executive overhead, was the second crack. He wasn't talking about strategy, he was talking about money. So what happens to my compensation? I asked, already knowing the answer. Well, he began, leaning forward as if offering a concession. Compensation is tied to title. Since the structure isn't changing, your salary stays aligned with senior manager levels. But once the VP role is reopened, you'll be the top candidate. No question. The third crack wasn't subtle. It was a fissure that split everything I thought I understood about my value here. I stared at him, and for the first time in my career, I saw him clearly, someone who benefited from my work far more than he appreciated it. Just be patient, he added, like patience was a renewable resource I hadn't already spent 14 years giving away. Keep doing what you're doing, prove your readiness. I breathed in slowly, letting the humiliation burn through me without showing a single flicker on my face. Prove my readiness? After 14 years of rebuilding entire sections of this company from scratch? After keeping our coastal operations afloat through hurricane seasons, system outages, and staffing shortages, he wasn't just denying me something. He was erasing everything. And that's the part most commenters on stories like mine always mention. The moment you realize the person evaluating your worth is someone who could never do your job. Graham sat back again, clearly satisfied with his delivery, unaware that he had just undone more than a decade of loyalty in a handful of sentences. Is there anything else? He asked, flipping a pen between his fingers. No, I said quietly, gathering my notebook. There's nothing left to discuss. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. Not rage, clarity. Cold, absolute clarity about exactly what Harbor Point thought I was worth, and what happens when someone finally decides to stop letting their loyalty be exploited. I walked out of Graham's office without looking back, my steps steady, my expression calm enough that anyone passing by would have assumed the meeting went exactly as planned. But inside, something was shifting, quietly, decisively, like a tide pulling away from shore before a storm. When I reached my desk, I didn't even bother closing the door. I sat down, opened my laptop, and stared at the login screen for a full 5 seconds. Not because I was confused or overwhelmed, but because I knew that the moment I pressed enter, I wasn't coming back from whatever I was about to do. 14 years of loyalty had been condensed into a single phrase in Graham's office. Be patient. That was the moment loyalties flipped. I signed in. Not to check terminal schedules, not to review carrier compliance, not to draft weekend routing updates. I opened my LinkedIn page. My profile photo, professional, polished, taken during a rare day I wasn't covered in port dust, stared back at me. For years I'd kept the open to work setting off out of some misguided sense of commitment. But now, with the echo of Graham's voice still fading, I clicked the button and slid the setting to open. Suddenly, my inbox began populating with messages I had ignored for months. Recruiters, former colleagues, industry contacts, invitations to connect for leadership opportunities. I had pushed them aside because I believed Harbor Point was my future. That belief evaporated the moment Graham uttered the word postponed. One email in particular stood out, buried between automated networking notifications. Sent 2 weeks earlier, subject line simple and direct, VP of Coastal Operations, interested in a conversation? The sender, Cole Maddox, COO of Iron Wave Transport Group, one of Harbor Point's most aggressive competitors. I had ignored it, assuming my promotion at Harbor Point was finally a done deal. Now, reading it again, something in me sharpened. Cole had attached a brief note. Vera, Iron Wave is expanding rapidly on the Gulf Coast. Your reputation precedes you. If you're open to discussing a senior leadership opportunity, I'd greatly value a conversation. My reputation precedes me. 5 words Graham had never used. I hovered over the reply button, breathing slowly, letting the decision settle. In the comment sections of stories like this, people often say, "That was the moment you woke up." And they're right. That was the moment I stopped confusing loyalty with self-sacrifice. I typed, "Cole, apologies for the delay. I would be interested in speaking with you. Available this weekend if that works on your end?" Vera, I hit send, a small controlled action, but it felt like lighting a fuse. I leaned back, letting the weight of the moment land. For the first time since joining Harbor Point, I wasn't thinking about how to protect them. I was thinking about how to protect myself. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Evan, one of my strongest coordinators. "Heard your promotion got postponed again. If you ever leave this place, I'm right behind you." I stared at that message longer than I should have, because it wasn't just support, it was a sign that I wasn't the only one who saw Harbor Point's true colors. By the time I shut down my laptop that evening, I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I was clear. Graham thought he'd ended a conversation. What he didn't realize was that he'd started a chain reaction he would never be able to stop. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, the kind of alertness that comes when your life is shifting in ways you can feel but haven't fully processed yet. I brewed coffee, sat at my kitchen, table overlooking the quiet street, and reread Cole Maddox's email thread. His reply had come in less than half an hour after I messaged him. "Absolutely. Can you meet tomorrow at 9 a.m.? I'll clear my schedule." Executives don't clear their schedules unless they mean business. Harbor Point certainly never cleared anything for me. I arrived at Iron Wave's headquarters Saturday morning wearing a simple blazer, no nerves, no second guessing. The building overlooked the harbor from a different angle than Harbor Point's offices, and for the first time, I realized how small my world had been over there. I was greeted immediately, offered coffee, and escorted to a conference room where Cole was already waiting. He stood, shook my hand, and said, "Vera, thank you for coming. I've wanted this conversation for a long time." No pretense, no ego, no dismissiveness. This was a man who respected what I brought to the table. We talked for nearly 90 minutes. He didn't waste time listing what Iron Wave wanted. He asked me what I needed, what resources I required, what kind of authority I believed a VP of Coastal Operations should hold to be effective. No one at Harbor Point had ever asked me what I needed to succeed. They just asked how quickly I could fix whatever had already gone wrong. When we got to compensation, Cole didn't flinch. "We're prepared to offer you $232,000 to start, plus performance-based bonuses and a path to equity if growth projections continue." It was roughly 40% more than I made at Harbor Point, but the money wasn't the part that struck me hardest. It was when he added, "You'll have full operational control. I hire talent to lead, not to be second-guessed." I felt something in my chest loosen, like I was finally breathing air I didn't have to earn. After outlining Iron Wave's expansion plans, he leaned back and asked, "One more thing. If you join us, would you be willing to help build the right team? You've trained some exceptional people over the years. I hear their work mirrors your own." The words weren't manipulative. He hadn't asked for names. He wasn't trying to lure anyone. He was simply acknowledging something crucial. Talent grows where it's nurtured. Somewhere deep down, I knew that if I accepted this role, the people who respected me wouldn't stay behind at Harbor Point for long. I nodded slowly. "I can build you a world-class operations team," I said, "but I do it my way." Cole smiled. That's exactly why I want you. I accepted the offer before I left the building. By the time I stepped out into the midday sun, the decision didn't feel sudden or reckless. It felt overdue. Harbor Point had waited 14 years to define my value. Iron Wave defined it in one meeting. And whether Graham knew it yet or not, the real consequences of his postponement were already in motion. Monday morning arrived with a strange sense of calm. Not relief, just a quiet certainty, like watching a tide roll in that you've known was coming for miles. I drove to Iron Wave's office for my first official day as VP of Coastal Operations, parked in my designated space, and walked through the doors with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I hadn't even set my bag down when my personal phone buzzed. A forwarded email from a former Harbor Point colleague, Evan Brooks, my most dependable coordinator, had submitted his resignation at 8:12 a.m., effective in 2 weeks. My pulse didn't spike. I didn't smile. I simply acknowledged what I already knew. People don't follow titles, they follow leadership. 20 minutes later, another email arrived. Sienna Hale, resigning at 8:37 a.m. Then, at 9:04 a.m., Noah Kim. 3 resignations in less than an hour. 3 people who had kept Harbor Point's entire coastal workflow functioning during hurricanes, staffing shortages, and peak season chaos. The very same people Graham assumed would stay no matter how the company treated them. I didn't tell them to resign. I didn't even hint at it. They had simply seen exactly what I saw, a workplace that wanted their effort, not their growth. At 9:22 a.m., my phone rang. Graham's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Vera, what the hell is happening?" His voice was tight, shaky. Nothing like the smooth confidence he wielded on Friday. "3 of your senior coordinators just resigned. Did you know about this?" I kept my tone void of emotion. "Graham, I haven't been your employee since Friday evening. Their decisions are not my responsibility." "You what?" he snapped. "I didn't receive any resignation notice." "I sent my resignation email at 6:47 p.m. Friday," I said. "It was effective immediately." Silence. Then a sharp exhale. "Where are you working now?" "Iron Wave Transport Group," I replied, "as their new VP of Coastal Operations." Another long pause, then disbelief. "Iron Wave? A competitor? You're working for a competitor?" "I'm working for a company that offered me the position you postponed indefinitely." His breath hitched, and for the first time in 14 years, the power in the conversation shifted fully to me. "Vera, be reasonable. Are Evan, Sienna, and Noah following you to Iron Wave?" I glanced at the employment contracts on my new desk, their signatures still crisp. I didn't owe him honesty that would spark accusations. "People choose the environments where they're respected," I said. "If your senior staff is leaving, perhaps they're seeking opportunities you couldn't provide." "This is coordinated poaching," he snapped. "You're orchestrating this." "No," I said evenly. "I accepted a role. I informed Iron Wave that I've trained exceptional people. What they choose to do with their careers is entirely their choice." His voice cracked at the edges. "Vera, listen. We can fix this. I'm prepared to reopen promotion discussions, immediate elevation. We can revisit salary, let's talk numbers. Just come back in and we'll—" "Graham," I cut in. "3 days ago, you told me to be patient, to prove my readiness. Now you're offering what you claimed the budget couldn't support. What changed?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We both knew the truth. Harbor Point wasn't motivated by fairness. They were motivated by fear. Fear of losing the expertise they'd assumed would never walk away. "Tell me what it would take to bring you back," he finally said, voice desperate. I looked around my new office. My title on the door, the authority I'd earned, the future I chose. "There's nothing you can offer," I said quietly. "Because this isn't about compensation. This is about respect, and you already showed me how little I had." I ended the call. Behind me, through the window, the port cranes moved methodically in the distance. But at Harbor Point, I knew everything was starting to fall apart. By Tuesday morning, barely 24 hours after the first resignations hit, the fallout at Harbor Point had already begun to spread. Word travels fast in port logistics, faster than any vessel schedule or gate manifest. I didn't have to monitor anything. Updates found me on their own. A former colleague texted me at 7:18 a.m. Operations are unraveling. They put a junior coordinator in charge of reroute approvals. She's panicking. I could almost predict the next message before it arrived. At 8:04 a.m., another buzz. A refrigerated container missed its plug-in window. Client furious. Demurrage penalties incoming. I set my phone aside, not because I didn't care, but because I no longer bore any responsibility for the disaster they had set in motion. Still, I had spent 14 years building systems there. Watching those systems crumble in incompetent hands felt like watching a structure you once poured concrete for suddenly tilt and sink. By Wednesday, the real crisis hit. Harbor Point mishandled a 3-vessel arrival sequence, something that had never happened under my watch because I had personally created the staggered docking protocol that prevented congestion at Pier 9. Without Evan, Sienna, or Noah, nobody remaining on Graham's team knew how to run it. The replacement staff overlapped arrival windows, assigned the wrong priority codes, and failed to notify customs in time. 2 vessels ended up idling for nearly 9 hours. The clients issued formal performance complaints by noon and initiated penalty clauses that easily exceeded $60,000. A message came through from a friend on the ground. Vera, it's chaos. No one knows who's responsible for coordinating the inbound loads. Graham is trying to run things himself, but he doesn't understand the sequencing and keeps contradicting his own supervisors. For the first time, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, but confirmation. This wasn't revenge. This was what happens when a company builds its entire operational backbone around one person and then treats that person as disposable. By Friday of the same week, the meltdown wasn't rumor, it was industry news. An article appeared in a regional supply chain bulletin, Harbor Point Freight Experiences Coastal Workflow Disruptions Following Senior Staff Turnover. A polite way of saying the house was burning down. The article cited rapid operational inconsistencies, communication failures, and elevated delay counts. Those were the kinds of phrases logistics professionals used when something was catastrophically wrong. And it wasn't just vessels. Clients were pulling contracts. I got a screenshot from the procurement director of a longtime Harbor Point customer. We're evaluating alternative logistics partners. Service reliability has declined sharply. That same afternoon, one of Harbor Point's largest importers rerouted a full month's worth of bookings, straight to Ironwave. I didn't celebrate. I simply forwarded the note to Cole with a short message. We should be ready for an increase in container flow. He replied within minutes, already increasing staffing, thank you. Meanwhile, at Harbor Point, things were going from bad to unrecognizable. Staffing reports showed 5 more resignations by Monday of week 2. Analysts, coordinators, even an assistant terminal supervisor. The people who remained were stretched thin, overworked, and constantly scrambling to fix problems they didn't have the training for. Harbor Point tried to plug the holes by hiring a crisis logistics consultant team for $15,000 a week, but consultants can't rebuild years of institutional knowledge, and they can't replace trust. And trust was the first thing to die the moment Graham dismissed my promotion with a shrug. By the end of week 2, Harbor Point's coastal on-time performance dropped from 98% to 83%. For a logistics company, that isn't a dip. It's a free fall. Clients panic at anything below 90. 83 is an obituary. On the 15th day, I received a message from a former supervisor who'd stayed behind. They're drowning. No one wants to stay. Everyone is updating their resumes. This place won't survive the quarter. I stared at that message for a long moment, not because I felt guilt, but because the truth was finally undeniable. The collapse wasn't caused by my departure. It was caused by Graham's belief that I was replaceable. Harbor Point didn't lose me. They lost the foundation they spent 14 years standing on, and the weight of their own choices was finally catching up to them. 3 weeks after I walked out of Harbor Point for the last time, Ironwave's coastal division was running smoother than companies twice our size. It wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It was what happens when leadership actually values the people who keep the wheels turning. I spent those early weeks mapping workflows, strengthening carrier partnerships, and building a disaster response structure that didn't rely on heroics, just competent systems and competent people. And with Evan, Sienna, and Noah joining me within days, I didn't have to build from scratch. When they walked through Ironwave's doors on their first day, there was no dramatic reunion, no bitterness about what had happened. Just quiet relief, like people stepping into a room where they finally didn't have to brace for impact. Cole met each of them personally. He shook their hands, looked them in the eyes, and told them something they had never heard from Harbor Point's leadership. "We're glad you're here." It didn't take long for the numbers to reflect what morale already knew. By the end of our first quarter, Ironwave reached a 96.8% on-time rate, a figure Cole celebrated like we just reinvented global logistics. To me, it just felt like what happened when people were given the authority and resources they'd been denied for years. Clients noticed too. Some of the same customers who had lodged complaints against Harbor Point began sending inquiries our way. "Heard great things about your new VP," one wrote. "We're reviewing our service providers. Can we schedule a call?" We took those calls. We signed those contracts. We rebuilt client relationships that Harbor Point had neglected or mishandled. Within 3 months, Ironwave secured over $100 million in new coastal business, much of it from companies that had lost patience with Harbor Point's mounting failures. I didn't celebrate Harbor Point's losses. I celebrated Ironwave's wins, the same way gardeners celebrate growth rather than weather damage. But the truth is, growth and damage rarely exist separately. One afternoon, about a month after the meltdown began, I received a message from someone still inside Harbor Point. "Graham's being moved. They're calling it a role realignment, but everyone knows he's being pushed out." It didn't surprise me. In logistics, failure has fingerprints, and Graham's were all over Harbor Point's collapse. He had gambled that institutional memory and operational expertise could be replaced with eager optimism and thin budgets. He was wrong. 2 weeks after that, another update. "He's gone. No announcement, just gone." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. But I did feel something shift inside me, a quiet resolution, like a door closing on a chapter I had outgrown long before I walked away. Meanwhile, Ironwave was entering a new era. We expanded our coastal routing capabilities, secured long-term contracts with 2 major importers, and began planning a multi-million-dollar optimization system that would finally modernize a part of the port ecosystem that had been stuck in the past. Cole approached me one morning during a workflow review. "You know," he said, leaning against the doorframe of my office, "people keep telling me we've become the most reliable coastal operations team in the Southeast." I raised an eyebrow. "And who exactly is people?" He grinned. "Our competitors. That's how you know it's real." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt surreal to be in a place where leadership not only recognized my contribution, but celebrated it. At Harbor Point, my success had been a quiet expectation. At Ironwave, it was a catalyst for everything we were building. As the days passed, I realized something important. Vindication isn't loud. It's not dramatic or cinematic. It's quiet. It's steady. It's the feeling of walking into an office where your nameplate matches your responsibility. It's seeing your team thrive. It's watching the company that underestimated you struggle under the weight of their own decisions while you flourish somewhere else. And most of all, it's knowing you didn't have to destroy anything. All you had to do was walk away. In the months that followed, people began reaching out to me. Junior coordinators, mid-level managers, even seasoned logistics veterans from other ports, asking the same questions that always show up in the comment sections of stories like mine. How do you know when a promotion promise is fake? How long should you wait before walking away? What if leaving ruins my career? I used to struggle with those questions. I used to think there was a right answer, a perfect moment when loyalty paid off and patience was rewarded. But standing where I am now, looking back at everything that unfolded, the truth is much simpler than people want to admit. You don't wait for the perfect moment. You wait for clarity. And clarity comes the second you realize the people benefiting from your work have no intention of honoring the future they're dangling in front of you. At Harbor Point, clarity arrived the moment Graham told me to prove my readiness after 14 years of running an entire coastal division with results they bragged about publicly but refused to recognize internally. Clarity came when he said budget constraints with the same tone someone might use to decline a lunch invitation. Clarity came when I realized that no matter how many weekends I worked, how many crises I solved, how many times I held that place together with sheer will, they would always see my contribution as convenient, not valuable. I tell people something now that I wish someone had told me years earlier. A company will always reveal what you mean to them long before you realize it yourself. Sometimes it's in the opportunities they give you. Sometimes it's in the ones they quietly take away. And sometimes it's in the way they expect you to keep sacrificing without ever offering anything in return. When promotions get postponed repeatedly, when promises stretch into years, when leadership keeps shifting timelines but never their expectations, that's not a future. They're just buying time with your loyalty. And time, once spent, doesn't come back. Walking away didn't destroy my career. It rebuilt it. It opened doors I didn't even know existed. It gave me a team that chose to follow me, not because of a title, but because I had always treated them with the respect we never got from above. At Ironwave, I learned something Harbor Point never taught me. Loyalty isn't earned by fear or obligation or empty promises. Loyalty grows where people feel seen, supported, and trusted to lead. Sometimes I think about the day I left, quiet, unceremonious, barely a ripple at first. And sometimes I think about the weeks that followed, the resignations, the client departures, the operational collapse. Not because I take pride in what happened, but because it proves something most people don't want to believe. When companies break the trust of the people holding them up, the fall is never sudden. The fall begins the moment they stop valuing the hands that built their success. If you're reading this because you're waiting on a promotion someone keeps postponing, ask yourself one question. Are they investing in your future, or are they asking you to sacrifice it? If the answer stings, that's your clarity, and clarity is your way out. When I look back on everything that happened, what stays with me isn't the collapse of Harbor Point or the titles I gained afterward. It's the moment I finally understood my own limits. Betrayal has a way of stripping things down to the truth. You learn who you are when the ground shifts beneath you. For me, this story wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about finally choosing myself after years of giving more than I had. That's the heart of the lesson: rebirth and boundaries. Rebirth, because sometimes the life you've been holding on to is the thing keeping you from the life you actually deserve. And boundaries, because loyalty without limits turns into self-neglect. Americans my age know this deeply. We're raised to work hard, to keep our heads down, to be the dependable one. But dependable doesn't mean disposable. When a workplace keeps taking and never giving, when they reward your sacrifice with silence, that's not a career. That's a warning. Life has a way of pulling us forward when we finally stop clinging to things that hold us back. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife. I didn't sabotage anyone. I didn't need revenge. I simply walked away and the truth revealed itself. If you're living a version of this right now, here's what I've learned. You don't need permission to outgrow a place that no longer sees you, and you don't owe anyone your burnout. How to get started today. Write down every promise your workplace has made and which ones they've kept. Set one boundary before the day ends, even a small one. Update your resume or LinkedIn quietly. Reach out to one person who sees your worth. You'll need them more than you know. If any part of my story speaks to you, tell me in the comments. Share your own experiences, subscribe if you want more stories like this, and let's build a place where hardworking people finally get heard.